Hello and welcome to Risk Chats with AFERM. I'm your host, Paul Marshall. Today, Tal and I speak with Jason Leecost from Ginnie Mae about their ERM program. Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today we have Jason from Ginnie Mae. He leads the risk management program here. And Jason, introduce yourself. Let us know what you do for Ginnie Mae here.
Sure. So I'm the Director of Operational Risk. I work for the Chief Risk Officer. I have about 6 programs underneath of me: Enterprise Risk Management, Vendor Risk Management, Operational Risk, Operational Incident Tracking, Model Validation, and then our Continuity of Operations program.
Okay, great. And actually we have Tal Siemens, our co-host today. Don't want to leave him out.
Hey, good afternoon.
All right. So, Jason, why don't we start off with talk a little bit more about Ginnie Mae. It's kind of a unique entity in the federal world. So maybe just start with that and some of the unique risks that come with that organizational.
Sure. So Ginnie Mae plays in this kind of quasi space between federal and commercial. The commercial component is with our issuers. Our issuers are made up of banks and non-banks. So that's your quasi-commercial environment, dealing with government loans and them going to our issuers and being securitized through our program and being sold off as a government security. Mm-hmm. So along with that, you have credit risk, you have market risk, you have operational risk, the systems, the process, the payments to the investors, which are fairly large payments that happen twice a month. So you can't have any downtime with the systems. So that's one of the metrics that we look at. You have strategic and reputational risk. You know, I like the fact when I say Ginnie Mae, most people don't know what Ginnie Mae is. That means that we're keeping ourselves low and we're flowing below the radar, and we're doing what the government intended us to do. We support only federal loans. So that's the difference between us. Well, one of the differences between us and the GSEs. So when people get a VA loan, they get a FHA loan, agriculture. There's several other kind of federal loans. Those loans go through our issuers, and they get securitized by our issuers who are in our Ginnie Mae program. And then those things get sold off the market.
So what's a GSE?
So a GSE would be a government-sponsored entity.
Okay.
So that would be a Fannie or Freddie.
Okay.
Ginnie Mae is wholly owned by the government. We've always been wholly owned by the government. To give you a little historical background, Fannie Mae was first, and they focused on the government loans. At some point, about 10 years in, they decided to expand Fannie Mae's role, but they didn't want to lose the government role, focusing on the government loans. So they created Ginnie Mae.
Gotcha.
And so Ginnie Mae was created by the federal government, and it's wholly owned by the federal government, and it always has, and always will probably.
Right. So actually, yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, just on that introduction where you're talking about what Ginnie Mae does, how are you organized within the leadership of of Ginnie Mae? Are you at the CXO level? Are you
Great question.
Below it? Who do you report to? And how's that working?
So, Ginnie Mae has had a chief risk officer for about 10 years. My boss, Gregory Keith, has been a chief risk officer for about 6 or 7 of those years. I think it works out well for us because he's at the C-suite level. He sits at the peer level with our CFO, our CIO, and has direct reporting to our chief operating officer as well as our president. And so I think that gives us that gives us a strong presence within the organization. I think some of the things that also helps our organization is the fact that a lot of the people here are used to commercial entities, whether they're contractors that work with us, like, you know, large banks, or like our issuers, which could be banks or non-banks who have risk offices. They're used to those organizations having risk functions.
Right.
So the expectation is we should have it too.
Right. Now, how many sub-organizations are under the CRO? Is it all one organization, or are there divisions that? How many direct reports report to the CRO?
So Greg has 4 direct reports. I told you the areas I focus on.
Right.
He is the Chief Information Security Officer. focuses and reports to him, which is helpful for cyber risk. And so we work together because we're peers. We work together, and I make sure to include those IT risks, whether they're FISMA, whether they're cyber, whatever they may be, into our program. As you'll see on our taxonomy behind me, IT risk is underneath of operational. We also have our counterparty division and the director that leads that. And that focuses a lot on the underwriting and our credit side of the house. So that reports to him. So to get into our program, our counterparty has to do an underwriting of that issuer to determine if they meet the criteria to come into the Ginnie Mae program.
Gotcha.
Right? And then we also have the economic modeling group, which is in this group, which has a real impact on our financial statements, their forecast.
Right.
And so that's why one of the groups that sits under me is model validation.
Gotcha.
So since I'm separate, I'm a true second line, I do validation of those models.
So you got segregation of duties.
Correct.
Between people who build models and the people who prove them.
Correct.
All right.
Yeah. And more so it's reviewing the theory, the assumptions, the thought behind some of the calculations to make sure, as well as is the calculation itself correct.
Right.
Okay, so it sounds like you're the CRO is kind of one of the peers with the CFO and the other C-suite. So is the CFO's office the one that takes care of sort of internal control reviews, things like that at the organization? I would guess then.
No, I would say here we have a very we have an office within CFO that focuses on what I would call what was traditional A123 Appendix A.
Oh, okay.
But because I've gone through and documented the entire agency, flowcharted it out, you see one of the flowcharts there, whether it's we're all encompassing, kind of holistic in the review.
Right.
That includes financial, operational, strategic, and any other types of risk that will kind of fall on our taxonomy.
Right.
One of the things we do is we're starting to leverage the documentation we have to satisfy that, and then the dropping of the latest secular lends itself towards that type of thought.
Right.
So unintentionally, we were already headed that direction.
Okay.
And so we work really well together. They, I make sure to always get a copy if they have something built around cycle memos.
Yeah.
And then that way we're able to, when we go in, we understand where the financial controls are, but I'm able to document the entire process, and then I'm able to show people where financial plays a role in the overall process.
Right.
Which is a much better picture than just cutting a piece of the pie and saying this single control is something you need to focus on.
Right.
Because there's a lot of operational and strategic decisions that are made that may affect that financial control.
Right. Right.
And those things need to be accounted for.
Well, let's talk a little bit. I think something fundamental here is your taxonomy, your risk taxonomy. Maybe go a little bit into that and how that is a fundamental piece here.
Yeah. So our taxonomy, we're on version 2.0. The first year I did it, it only had we had a level 1, level 2, and then level 3. But our level 1 the first year was financial management, operational, strategic, and in legal. And so the struggle with it being 4 at the level 1 was if I want to develop metrics around the risk that are related to those different buckets, they were too broad.
Oh, right.
So in version 2.0, we pulled market and credit out of financial because accounting, reporting, and financial auditability is very different than credit risk.
Right.
Right? And it's very different than market risk.
Right.
And so those deserve their own buckets, and they deserve their own metrics, and they deserve their own kind of attention, if you will, right? Because they bring a different type of exposure to the organization.
Right.
Same thing with governance oversight. We have governance oversight lapped underneath strategic. And I think your strategic goals and your strategic kind of plan, and as well as the risk associated with strategic, are different than necessarily government oversight.
Sure.
So we wanted to break that out too.
Right, because like on one, it's about how ambitious and challenging your mission is in terms of goals versus a changing environment, versus the other one is just how well does the organization lead and set the tone at the top for success.
Exactly.
I agree. That's great. I was up there taking pictures with your permission, Jason. Paul will go ahead and post that on the website with the podcast so that listeners can see the enterprise risk universe as it's been plotted by Ginnie Mae.
Yes. No. I'd appreciate that. It's taken a lot of work. It's something we put a lot of thought into. It's something definitely at the level 3. We're open to always kind of updating it on an annual basis.
Right.
So one of the things is we've gone through and documented all the risk and controls within the agency, and operational incidents helps with that too, because that catches the things that we didn't document a lot of the times, or we catch failures in a process that we thought had a mitigant in place that was working well, but then something failed. We use that to update the taxonomy, so when I come back to my boss, I'm able to communicate this information. Not only can I tell him where we have problems, but I'm able to segregate the problems so he knows, okay, within credit risk, for example, you have a problem in concentration risk with an issuer, right? So that's a real risk. So when you understand it, then that's very different than traditional financial management in accounting and reporting. But previously they were lumped together, and that didn't give you enough clarification that you needed to really understand the risk. So by breaking it out this way, you can now drive all the way down to the lower level, understand what those risks are, but then you can roll it up too, and I can give them a pie chart by level 1, I can give them a pie chart or a bar graph by level 2, and even if I needed to, level 3, if he said, okay, what in credit, if I see credit as one of my bigger areas, what's in credit, what's driving some of my problems in credit, or what is my higher risk? And I might say concentration risk, industry risk, and some counterparty or maybe market practices. And then with underneath that, I'm able to drive to level 3 to show him what may be the leading indicator in those areas that are causing this high risk. And so it allows us to have information to give the leaders so they can make decisions. Right?
Gotcha.
Right, and obviously it's a great tool to report up to the CRO, but also to navigate your stakeholders in these different areas, right? So maybe give us a little insight on how do you.
Well, again, I'm really appreciative of the leadership at Ginnie, and I'm appreciative of the managers and the staff because they wanted risk management.
That's good.
Right, and that's very different. Now, we all may think differently about what is risk management. But that's my job to communicate it and to facilitate those discussions so we can come to some common ground. Right? So it's not my way as the right way. It's not someone else's way as the right way. But through discussion and through integration, we can come up with what is a good way for Ginnie Mae. And that's what it's really about. But because I work in an environment of individuals who care about risk and care about risk management and they care about protecting the program, it made it a lot easier for me to have these discussions. It was almost like, what are you waiting on? We want you, get this thing in place. We need it. It helps us because it helps managers manage their process. When your process is documented and your team agrees with the way the process was documented and the risk in there, not only does it give a level of transparency as to what your process is, it gives a level of transparency around what your risks are, but it also lets every staff know how they play a role in the bigger picture of the organization.
Right. Well, maybe that leads into one of my questions was, with such a large portfolio of, different kinds of risks at this, at Ginnie Mae, how, what have you seen? How do you manage this? Or it sounds like your stakeholders are really taking ownership of this.
We're still young and rolling this thing out. I've been here a little over 3 years. And we've been working on it every day. Again, appreciative of the staff and the leadership for being accepting of it. But we still have a long way to go. But we're moving well. I think on a maturity scale, every year we take one step to getting better. The ideal goal is when you get to proactive risk management and you produce reports that management really uses to make decisions.
Right.
And so where are we on that, right? So we just finished documenting our largest business office, actually the end of August. 18 months spent documenting them. 1,000-page document.
Wow.
On flows, and I focused on flows more so than just narratives because people can digest visual documents a lot easier, and so we focused on flows mostly with some context around the boxes so people can drive in. But it was focused on getting the flows right so I can really hurry up and quickly drive into the risk and then drive into the controls.
Right.
And so that's where we're at on that scale. So now that we've kind of turned the corner in documentation, now my staff is challenged with the fact of following up on a annual and a biannual, so twice a year, following up on the gaps that we've identified with the different offices, so that then we can start to address the things that are out there to fix them.
Like the new 8123 Appendix A, as they're talking about I-cores, they're talking about making sure we have established data quality objectives for all of our material reports and material reporting line items. Jason just held it up. He's got it tabbed and underlined and highlighted. Right. It really gets to the point where, you know, it is essential to have good objectives for each of your areas so that you can identify and analyze the risk to meeting those objectives. So you guys on Tier 2 have 7 areas and you got 35 categories of risk underneath those 7 in your universe. How many of those have good objectives down such that when it comes time to identifying risks and analyzing the impact of that risk against meeting that objective, do they all? Do some of them? Most of them?
Well, so now I think you're bleeding into the discussion around appetite.
Well, exactly.
Right?
True.
So
True.
The way we look at appetite, taxonomy plays a role in it. And it helps us understand where these bigger risks are. So what I'm showing you right now on the screen is a part of our risk profile. We break out where those top 10 risks are and where they at a tier level 1 and where they're at as a tier level 2. So the slide previously shows you tier 1, what was driving are some of our larger risks. And then tier 2 shows you the level 1 and the level 2, so it shows you underneath of it what are the things that are really driving. So if operational is one of our larger risks, now you can see, for example, procurement plays a role in that, IT plays a role in that, in the operational space, right? So now you understand that. But from an appetite standpoint, I think there's 2 good ways to kind of do appetite from a standpoint of building one. You can build it around your taxonomy. So each level 1 could have an appetite statement.
Yeah.
Or you can do the way we chose. Each strategic goal for the organization has an appetite. So each strategic goal for us has an appetite. And then we're now going through the process of building metrics for each appetite statement. So how do I know that we're making progress towards our appetite? So it's one thing to have an appetite statement. It's another thing to follow it.
Okay.
And so how do we do that? How do we quantify that? How do we understand if we're actually following this appetite that we put out there?
Now, would you have like an example of what it means that you just described? Putting metrics in place that shows that you're following your appetite.
So in this slide I'm showing you right here, this is an example of where we have a management goal, right? Strategic goal. Then we have an appetite adjacent to that. And then we have metrics that we've placed underneath of that to help us measure to it.
For the folks listening, could you describe the specific goal and the metrics like for this example for folks so they can get an idea?
Yeah, so I don't want to give too much of Ginnie Mae's risk away.
Oh, all right.
But
just between us here community.
Yeah, but
Generics.
yeah, but we wanna for example, operations. You might have a system that's important in meeting one of your strategic goals,
Right.
and downtime is
There you
important,
go. Okay. So
right?
Uh-huh.
So putting metrics around, can we afford to be down? We can't afford to be down more than 4 hours on a
Right.
day when payments are due, right?
Right.
Okay.
So
How are you measuring
making
against
so
that?
how are we measuring against
Right.
that? So are we saying, okay, we have an appetite where 2 hours is reasonable, 4 hours we know we can't do, 0 of course is perfect, right?
Right.
So it's forcing people to have a discussion around trade-offs,
Right.
around appetite.
Yeah, I like that. It makes it very tangible. Not
Yes.
just kind of a, theoretical or
Yeah, and,
wishy-washy kind of
and
thing.
it takes time.
Yeah.
It takes time. And within a year, just to focus on the enterprise level, we still have another few years to go on the programmatic level.
Mhm.
But it helps a lot because we have the program areas documented. So at least when we go in to have discussions around appetite, we know what their real risks are, and we know what their controls are, and we know what the purpose of that division is. So when we try to create an appetite around the purpose of that division, and we can use their metrics and their risk and controls to start the discussion around what are real metrics that should be in place to understand. They might be metrics you're already generating, right? Because one of our goals is in creating metrics is we want to leverage as much information that's already being produced as possible,
Sure. Yeah.
and see if you can provide that on a quarterly basis. Because I don't want you to create. My job isn't to create more work for you. So if you have a metric that says, look, we already measure when the systems are out, and we measure when we're up and running, and we have metrics on that. Well, great. Then those are the type of things that I want to leverage to see if we're in line with the appetite we just discussed.
Right. Well, because appetite's going to translate to, where do we focus our funds and our time and energy, right?
Exactly.
So if your appetite for system being down is extremely low, then you've got to, make sure there's funding available when downtime happens or whatever, right? So
Or
Exactly.
redundancies, backups,
or-
etc. Whatever the strategy is, yeah.
Well, no, and that leads into kind of the coop work, right?
Right.
So-
Right, exactly.
So
Yeah.
one of the things that when you start laying things out and identifying this is, where are your essential functions as it pertains to your high risk, right? And so those one of the things that we're still very new in this space, but that's one of the things that we're thinking about because we want to make sure when we give management information to make decisions, we want to make sure we give them as much information as possible. So if we also tell someone, hey, this area is an area of high risk, this is the type of appetite we have on it, but by the way, our 2 of our essential functions reside in this space. So you need to know that. Management needs to know that when they make a decision. My boss needs to know that when he makes a decision on, communicating that with his bosses or with his peers, and they make strategic around, budget, resources, all of those type of decisions. They need to have that information.
Right. And how long have you had these, risk appetite statements, so to speak, up and running?
Literally, we started a year ago.
Oh wow. Okay.
I would say within the last few months, we've had these statements, and the metrics are still at the enterprise level. They're probably, if a scale of 1 to 10, 10 is complete. We're probably on a scale of 7 or 8.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're still working through it. My boss is giving me critiques on them,
Sure.
and then after his critiques, I go and socialize it with his peers, and they give critiques, and we get back. So it's iterations.
Right.
It's no silver bullet.
Sure.
Right? So, and we don't have a goal of getting it done right now. The goal is, trying to improve a little bit every day.
It also sounds like you're really trying to, bring some value from this program to the organization. We're just not,
Yes.
ooh, what's the risks and kind of be worried about them. You're really doing proactive steps to really track them,
Yep.
measure them, do something about it. That's a big deal.
It is a big deal, and honestly, that's our value proposition.
Yeah.
We have to give you information that helps you make decisions. And if we're not doing that, if we're just collecting information to collect it, we're not a value add.
Right.
Right? So if I can, this is years down the road, but, at some point create some snazzy reports that go to senior leadership that help senior leadership make budget decisions, make strategy decisions, make, resource decisions, then I've accomplished my goal.
Right.
Right? Because now I'm actually giving the senior leaders the tools, an additional tool. They already have tools, but an additional tool they can use to help them make a decision.
That sounds great.
Well, so another area I want to cover today is the risk profiles. Just curious what your approach was to putting those together, and yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the risk profile, this is year 2. The great thing is, again, because we have stuff documented at a office level, we're able to roll up those risks to maybe a group of maybe 60, and then we have workshops, and where we go through that 60 and we cut it down.
Okay.
Right, and we do it through individual interviews, so everyone doesn't always have to be pulled into the same room. We'll get meet with certain people as risks are in their area, and I say, as a senior leader in this area, these are the risks we've identified. What do you think about these risks, or any of these risks that you want to elevate to an enterprise level? And I ask them to elevate it because you want them to own it.
Right.
And if they're willing to elevate it, that means to me that they think is something that they're willing to put out front in front of their peers, as well as their bosses.
Right.
So we ask them for that, and sometimes they say stuff that we didn't have captured, and that's great too. And so we capture that information, we go about doing that across the board. Then we do a survey. We send out the survey to everyone. We ask them about impact and probability, but then we add an additional column talking about it. We have 2 additional things. We have one a context box. So if you have comments about the risk, whether you like, dislike, or you think we can improve it one way, we give you a certain amount of characters to explain that thought. But then we also ask you regarding resources, do we have enough, too much, or not enough? And so as it rolls up, you can, once you get to the point where you can actually see the risk, right, in the profile, you'll see whether we have not enough, the right amount, or too much.
Okay.
And you'll see which one is a leading indicator, and you'll be able to communicate that based on where that risk fell in the overall heat map. And so this is additional information we can give to senior leaders, so they now understand that this might be a medium to high risk, but the census in the room is we don't have enough resources, or we have the right amount, or too much. So we want to give them as much information as possible without overwhelming them, to help them make decisions.
Right.
So if you got a risk and you know whether you have enough resources around it, that helps you too.
Yeah.
Because now you know whether I got the right amount, not enough, or so at least that's the sense of the room. Now you still have to make your own decision.
Right.
But my job is to set the table, not to tell you what to eat. Right.
Right. So speaking of setting the table,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of folks that are still on more early side of program development and implementation at their agency.
Mm-hmm.
What words of wisdom would Jason tell them that if you're on the earlier side of the program maturity model, here's what I'd encourage you to do to get the most miles ahead for the future that you can?
Develop a sponsor. If you can get multiple sponsors, do that. Take it slow. We did a pilot year where we did one small office, one medium-sized office the first year. It allowed us to cut our teeth and learn a lot. That was very helpful. And then not only did we learn a lot, we were very flexible in the process. So by the time we ended that process, at the beginning I asked them, what do you want to see at the end of this? That would say that we added value. Right? So I have that at the beginning kind of as my guide.
Right.
Right? And the whole time I'm working towards that, as well as trying to accomplish what other goals I may have in place. But the benefit of that is when I finish that assessment, it may be one office, and you might have 10 more, 20 more to go. But now you develop goodwill, and you have a sponsor.
Right.
And so the next time you roll out, maybe you grab 3 offices. Right? It's iterations. And so guess what? If you do the same thing and you do it well, when you finish year 2, like we did, now I got 5 sponsors.
Right.
And guess what? I got 3 left to go. right? My organization is smaller than some, so it'll be a different strategy for every organization. There is no, my way fixes everyone's way. We all have different approaches. But I think if you're patient, you just as much as you're trying to explain stuff, you're willing to listen.
Right.
You'll go a long way, and develop those sponsors to that support your program, because word of mouth goes a long way.
Well, and following up on that, for your own organization, for Ginnie Mae, what would you like to see the development of ERM in the next year or two? Where do you?
So, senior leaders continue to absorb the work that we're doing. Give me valuable input on the reports they would like to see.
Mm-hmm.
Continue to give me feedback on ways I can improve, in ways I can give them better information to help them make decisions. I don't know what's in their mind, but if they communicate it to me, my goal is to try to meet it and to try to give them things that are helpful.
Sounds good. Well, Jason, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yes,
We learned
thanks a
lot.
lot.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, that's our show. Thanks for tuning in. And we're looking forward to many new podcasts in the new year. So keep your eyes on the website. And until the next time, this is Paul Marshall signing off for Risk Chats with AFERM.